Hello, English 285. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody is well and staying safe and washing your hands and doing all that. Obviously, a super weird semester and a super weird time, but I hope everybody's hanging in there. We're hanging in there here. It's been very stressful. My wife working, worried about her health. Got the kids home from school, schoolwork for them. Obviously, everybody on the quarantine, and so that's all right. It's just a little stressful. Um, what else? Today I want to talk about some short story stuff, and I'll do that here in just a second. I'm trying to think if there's anything exciting to tell y'all about. If you've missed anything in my life, oh well, probably the most exciting thing is last week, maybe last Thursday or Friday. I'm in bed and I feel something and I wake up and my wife's already awake and I say, "Honey, I feel like something bit me on my neck." And she looks and there's two marks and it turns out I was stung by a wasp while I was sleeping. That was awful. That was a horrible way to wake up. But I have since been on a wasp killing mission, and I think that we have eliminated the wasp problem, at least for now. So no more waking up like that, hopefully. I hope y'all are not getting woken up by wasps. Let's talk about the remainder of the semester here, people. There is not much time left, and there is not much for you to do. You need to turn in your expert essay that's based off of the knife, 3 to 4 pages, double spaced. Um, and you need to get that to me. All of the work, if you have not sent it to me, all of the work needs to come to my Ball State email address, not through Canvas. So my Ball State email address, which is pbdavis@bsu.edu. So send me your stuff there. So you need to turn in your expert essay and you need to turn in your short story. What I'm going to talk about here is the short story, 7 to 10 pages, again, double spaced, again, sent to my Ball State email address. Um, Last time, and again, both of these things are due by the end of the semester, but otherwise there's no due date. Okay, so you've got to get these things done and get them to me, but you can do that on your own time. um, I want to talk about the short story. Last time, the last video, I talked about A Good Man is Hard to Find. I want to talk about two short stories today, both of which are on our syllabus and both of which I would like you to read. One is called Cathedral by Raymond Carver, and one is called Battle Royal by Ralph Ellison. And so I want to talk about those for a minute, hopefully reiterating a couple of points that I made last time, and maybe making a few things clearer. And then we'll see what else. So, first, let's talk about Cathedral by Raymond Carver. There's a reason why I wanted to talk about this short story. And here's the main one, right? Like, so listen, when we did A Good Man is Hard to Find, we talked about if you recall, we talked about the regular plot line and the way that normally goes with your exposition and your problem and your rising action and your climax and your resolution, etc. So we talked about that in terms of A Good Man is Hard to Find. And one of the things I mentioned, A Good Man is Hard to Find, is that I think I mentioned this, two of the most basic stories in the world are the story of going somewhere and having an adventure of some kind, which is very much what A Good Man is Hard to Find is. They go somewhere, something happens to them. The other big story is someone coming home from somewhere, and something happens when they get home. Um, Here, I want to point out, though, that those types of travel, that travel away, adventure, and that travel back, Those don't have to be literal travels, right? They can be metaphorical travels. And in the case of Cathedral, it can be a travel that he takes completely in his own mind. He's in the exact same location the entire story, but in his mind, he goes on an adventure, right? And so, just like a good man is hard to find. We have the same basic plot points here. We have a little bit of an exposition before we get to a problem. In the case of Cathedral, the problem is brought up relatively quickly in the first sentence. This blind man, an old friend of my wife's, he was on his way to spend the night. And I mean, in that first sentence, you already know that there's a problem. This blind man, the way he's referred to as this blind man, he's not referred to by his name or this, even a friend of my wife's, though he does say that, an old friend of my wife, but he starts out, this blind man, an old friend of my wife's. He was on his way to spend the night. He was on his way to spend the night. And you can tell by the way that he's talking about him in an impersonal way, how he says he's a friend of his wife's, not a friend of his, that he is not looking forward necessarily to this guy coming. And we already see the conflict. The conflict is here's a guy who's got a house and a wife, and another guy who happens to be blind is coming to spend the night. That is potentially a problem. Not necessarily, but already we know at the beginning that something has to be worked out. There is some kind of tension here taking place. And so the problem is introduced super early, and we get to the rising action, which is the visiting of Robert and all of the his wife talking to Robert, and them eating dinner, and them hanging out, and them smoking pot, and them drinking and watching TV, etc., to lead us to the climax, which I'm going to say the climax is right at the end of the story. So Raymond Carver, known for being a very what would say journalistic sort of writer, a guy who doesn't do a lot of flourishes with language, etc., but keeps it all pretty simple, pretty basic in terms of at least the sentence structure and all of that. Well, in this, the plot structure, he's got the problem introduced right at the beginning, and then right at the end, the narrator is drawing the picture with the blind man, and the blind man says, "Open up your eyes. What do you think?" And instead he keeps his eyes closed. But I had my eyes closed, and I thought I'd keep them that way for a little longer. I thought it was something I ought to do. "Well," he said, "are you looking?" My eyes were still closed. I was in my house, I knew that, but I didn't feel like I was inside anything. "It's really something," I said. And so I'm going to say that highlight, the climax of this story, is the moment when he says, "Open up your eyes," and he doesn't. And the reason why he doesn't is because he has made some major realization, which is he has made the realization that the blind man without sight can see and be more open, and that his lack of sight is not a hindrance to seeing the truth, or not a hindrance to seeing the world. It actually helps him. And in this way, the narrator keeps his eyes closed too, because he's made a breakthrough in terms of he can see that. The whole story, he's denigrating the blind man as just, oh, he's a blind man, you know, blind men can't watch TV, and he's got all sorts of ideas about blind men. Well, at the very end, he gets the idea that, sometimes keeping your eyes closed, maybe going on faith, sometimes keeping your eyes closed is the best way to see something. And so we have this nice reversal of stuff at the end, that the blind man comes to visit the sighted man, but at the end of the story, the sighted man has closed his eyes and become blind so that he could see better. So what a nice little resolution that is. So I just want to point out, though, again, the problem the climax, the resolution. The climax is, right? And I decided to keep my eyes closed. And then, well, he said, are you looking? And I said, I didn't feel like I was anywhere. I didn't feel, it's really something I said. That we could call the falling action of resolution. Just a couple sentences there at the end. So when you're writing your short story, I want you to be able to identify very clearly what is the problem, and it needs to happen very early in the story. The first sentence, well, Raymond Carver does that. Likewise, so did A Good Man Is Hard to Find. So you can introduce that problem very quickly. It leads to a climax, and I want you to be able to identify exactly what that climax is, and then a very short sort of resolution at the end. Again, you're only writing a 7 to 10 page story, which is not much time. So you're not going to have a bunch of time to sort of go through all kinds of resolution, right? And then they got married and had 2 children, and the children grew up and became kings and princes and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to have time from that. So you're going to have a problem, a climax, and you're going to have a very short resolution. I want you to be able to identify all of those things in the story. In this story, Cathedral, I want you to keep in mind this is a story is told in the first person. The person telling the story reveals himself to kind of be a jerk throughout the story, even though obviously he's telling the story and doesn't want to appear to be a jerk, I assume. But we figure out that he's kind of a jerk, which is the beauty of first-person stories, is that we can learn something about the person talking to us that they don't want us to know, per se. Which is to say, we can see their tendencies to lie, or we can see their tendencies to sort of shade the truth one way or another in a way that they can't. So we can learn stuff about them that they don't intend for us to learn. I think about that with my children. Like, I teach my children so much. I try to teach my children, like, be good people and blah, 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 blah. But then I always think, no matter what I am consciously teaching them, I am always unconsciously teaching them something. And what am I teaching them then? Oh, well, that's scary, because that's the part I can't see because I'm unconscious of it. So at any rate, I want you to be able to identify those things in the same way that we can see them in Cathedral. I would also like you to consider, why is this story called Cathedral? Seemingly it's called Cathedral because at the end of the story, the blind man and the narrator draw a cathedral together. And that cathedral is something that they've been watching on TV. And it's the act of drawing that cathedral together that brings these two guys closer together and has the narrator have this breakthrough. But it seems like to me that they could have been drawing anything and had the same realization, right? So anything that they were watching on the TV that the blind man potentially couldn't understand, like, so in this case, cathedrals, and so he needs help being shown where the cathedral is, but it could have just as easily been submarines, or I don't know, skyscrapers, or any other thing, nuclear power plant, right? Any other thing that's complicated and might be hard for somebody to imagine who's never seen it. But instead, he picks a cathedral to be the thing that they draw, a cathedral to be the thing that's on TV. And obviously, he names the story Cathedral, so that's important. So I would like you to think about why Cathedral is important here. I think there are probably a lot of things that we could think about that. One, I want to say cathedrals are where places where people are supposed to come together and supposed to have sort of spiritual awakenings or spiritual awareness. So they have congregated in a cathedral in a way, right, by drawing a cathedral. I don't know what else. There are other things to think about. Cathedrals take a long time to build. I don't know. They take generations in some cases. At any rate, why use a cathedral instead of a submarine? Because a cathedral gets to a sort of symbolic point in this world, which is there is a spiritual awakening, there is a spiritual side of life, there is another side of life that is not just about logistics and not just about whether you're blind or not. So, at any rate, I hope you see in this story again the nice reversal of the fact that the blind man man, 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 man and the sighted man is the person who is closed off. And so, at any rate, it's a nice little reversal of what we might normally think of. Okay, and so let's talk about Battle Royal for a minute, which likewise I want you to identify to be able to see the problem and the climax of. But Battle Royal is a different kind of story here, and I want you to talk about that real quickly. Battle Royal is what we call a framed story, which is to say, it starts with a story. And then inside that story, there's a story, another story, and this is what takes up the vast majority of our pages. And then at the end, we get back to that original story. So I always think of this like the movie The Princess Bride. If y'all know the movie The Princess Bride, it's a grandfather. He comes in, he's got a sick grandson. He comes over to read to his grandson. And he reads from this book. And the movie is what he reads from the book, though occasionally it gets interrupted by the grandson and we get pulled back into the 20th century and pulled back into reality for a few minutes. And at the very end of the movie, after we have gone through the whole story that's in that book, we have another little part of the grandfather and the grandson at the end. And so there are two stories taking place. There's the story of the father and the grandson, and then there's the story that the grandfather tells the grandson. Okay? Coincidentally, this is very similar. We have a story of a grandfather and a grandson, ending with a grandfather and a grandson. And in between there, instead of having a grandfather read a story, in between there, we have the grandson tell a story. Okay? So we've got two stories taking place, one in front and one on the end, and then one here in the middle. So I want to point out that both of those stories have a problem and a climax. So the problem with the grandfather and the grandson is that the grandfather on his deathbed acted kind of nuts, and the grandson doesn't understand why. And the grandson's been told that he's like his grandfather, so he gets that his grandfather's a little nuts. He gets that he's like his grandfather. This sets up a little problem of how do we deal with generations? How do we deal with what we've inherited? How do we deal with stuff? Okay, so there's a problem. Inside of that, he tells the story of the actual battle royal, which is when he's been invited to give a speech, but instead of being just given the speech, he has to first fight a bunch of other boys. I want to say be humiliated before he gets to tell his speech. In that story, we have the problem of he's shown up to give a speech and he has to fight. What's this about? That's a problem. That has to be worked out. And then it's eventually worked out by the end, right? And the climax, when he actually gets to give his speech and gets to a particular moment in the speech, which is when he accidentally says social equality and they stop him and they say you can't say that, and he says okay, and his life is in danger there for just a moment for slipping up, but that's like a climax in that story. So, the inside story has the problem of going to give a speech and ending up in a fight that climaxes in actually giving the speech. And then outside of that, again, we have this story of the problem with the grandfather and the grandson and generations, and that's sort of wrapped up at the end, too. So, two stories, two problems, two climaxes. I hope this all makes sense to y'all. This is a really fascinating story on a number of different levels, and I hope that you will read it and pay close attention to it, because it is both informative from a perspective about racial injustice in this world and about the kind of things that happened. It is also beautifully written and put together in a really tight again, I just want to say beautiful way, beautiful images, beautiful descriptions, a really great sense of like how to tell a story here. One of the big things that I want to highlight in this is obviously the problem in the climax and how we get to those things and how your story has to do those things. But I guess I just want to get at briefly some of the ideas that are in Battle Royal that to me are super important, and probably the most well, let me think about this. I was going to say the most important idea I guess I get about this story is the difference I want to say between having humility and being humiliated, and being humble and being humbled. Um, so for here, this son, like his grandfather, believes, at least talks about the idea of being humble and how being humble is a good thing. And his speech is about people who have to cast down their buckets, which is to say they've got to reach out and admit that they need help. And then once they get that help, so he believes in being humble. He believes in that, but his grandfather also believed that that was a way to fight the system, and so he's a little confused by that. But his grandfather's humility is the way that he sort of worked against the system, if that makes sense. Again, it's sort of very complicated. So, in this story, though, despite the fact that he has humility and that he's a humble dude, what actually happens in the story is that he gets humiliated, which is to say, to me, the difference is having humility is when you know yourself that you are not everything and you are not perfect, and you have humility about that. Being humiliated is when somebody knocks you down and says, "Ah, oh, you think you're this? No, you're this," and really takes you down. So that's a different kind of thing. And so here, his message is about being humble. He tries to personally be humble. In that, he gets humiliated further. And in that further humiliation, has more ideas about how to be, quote unquote, more humble in such a way as to advance the cause of his people and himself. The same way his grandfather tried to do too, which again is a really interesting idea here that his grandfather talks about the fact that his niceness to white society was really a type of treachery, was really a way of showing the white people to some degree or another that their stereotypes weren't true. And he knows that the whites act like they want him to act nice, but they would really rather him act mean and upset because that would fit their stereotype of what black people should be like. So he is undermining the system by being an example of what they don't expect. And maybe in some other ways. I don't know for sure. So anyway, really great stuff in that story. I hope that y'all again will pay attention to that and read it. I know I can't make y'all really read the stories at this point in time, but I just really encourage you to, because this is what college is for, right? To just be exposed to stuff and just read stuff, learn something. And again, this is a beautiful story. So I do hope you'll check it out. All right, people, this video is a little long. Sorry about that, but this might be the last video I do for you. Um, your short story, I want you to make sure you have a title for it. I want to make sure that you can absolutely identify the problem and you can identify the climax of that problem, the solution. I want to point out that once again, your story being only 7 to 10 pages means that you don't have much of a story. You don't have time to talk about a Harry Potter growing up and fighting Voldemort, etc. You don't have time to do a Star Wars trilogy. You can only do a relatively short story. And I mean, you can only do I don't want to say that you can I mean, you can cover vast amounts of time in a very short story. I'm thinking of the Bible, which covers huge amounts of time in very short little stories. But in general, I'm going to say short little stories are about short little things. I think that that's probably an easier way to think about it. So um, don't try to pack, as they might say, 10 pounds of something in a 3 pound bag or whatever, right? We don't have much space here for a story, so don't throw everything into it. It's just a little tiny story with a little tiny problem, with a little tiny climax, a little tiny solution. I hope that that makes sense to y'all. If you have questions or problems when you're working on this stuff, I hope that you will send me an email, and I will be happy to try to help you people. Um, if you get it in the short story and the expert essay by the end of the semester, and you have all your other work in, you're going to be in relatively good shape. It's a bummer to me that we've had to end the semester the way that we have. I apologize for not being more prepared, I want to say, for how to do all of this stuff in an online way. I hope if this kind of thing ever happens before, that I will be a little bit more prepared and a little bit more capable of dealing with it. So I apologize to whatever degree that I could have done better in this circumstance. And I hope you understand, right? That I'm just have been trying to do the best that I can, trying to do the best for y'all too. I know a number of you have family members who are sick. Some of you don't have access to Wi Fi the way others do. There's a lot of complexities in how to make the class fair and fair for everyone. So I probably could have done a better job of that, and I apologize, people. But this is a unprecedented time, right? Unprecedented stuff, and I hope you'll be understanding, and I hope that you will be safe. I hope that you will have fun writing your short story. I hope that you will read these short stories and have fun reading them, and appreciate the coolness of what's going on in them. I look forward to getting your stuff. Again, if you have questions or problems, you let me know. Send your stuff to my Ball State email, pbdavis@bsu.edu, not to Canvas. I would appreciate that. Also, too, I want to say, if you haven't turned in your expert essay, um, uh, I would like your expert essay and your short story to be in different documents. Okay, I don't want them all in the same document. If you could put them in different documents, I would appreciate that, and that will help me in the grading process. All right, people, this has dragged on long enough. I hope everyone will have a great day, and good luck with everything. Good luck with all your other classes. Let me know if you have questions or problems, and I'll try to help. Have a good one, everyone. Bye bye.